performing in front of 1 million people is terrific. But I used to love to walk through the spectator area prior to the air show and see kids and go over to them and shake their hands and talk to them. And it was stunning to see to have that sort of power, that you could make a kid's day by going over and talking to them, and that feedback that you actually made some kind of difference in some child's life. It was really, really something. My father was a Naval Academy graduate and was a submariner, career submariner. And I always expected to go submarines, including when I came down to Pensacola as a second classman in my junior year at the Naval Academy, or second class year at the Naval Academy. And riding in an airplane then, you're flying around in a T-34 with some instructor pilot or demo pilot or something that is just flying midshipmen around. And you're getting your head banged back and forth on the canopy, and it's hot, and you don't know what the levers are doing. And I had no aviation experience. I thought, no, this isn't for me, I'm a submariner. Near the end of my second class year, I remember it was a kind of a cool evening, and all of a sudden, 2 Phantoms, F-4 Phantoms, came over the top of Bancroft Hall at the Naval Academy, and at fairly low altitude, lit afterburner and pulled up. I thought, that is pretty daggone cool. And that's when I changed my idea that I was going to go aviation instead of submarines. I graduated in '69 from the Naval Academy, and someone came out with a message that said, if you'll enter the immediate master's program at the University of West Florida, you can start flight training right away. And so I applied for that because I just wanted to get going. And they accepted me, probationary acceptance, because my grades, I was just a 3.0 student at the Naval Academy, and they figured I probably wouldn't be able to handle the master's degree program while I was going through flight training. But I was able to, and so I started flight training about a month and a half, 2 months earlier than I would have otherwise. But as a result of that, I flew T-28s, which was the propeller. I went through the propeller prop pipeline for basic training, and then went to Kingsville for the A4 for the advanced jet training. I went from there, I stayed on as an instructor for, I wanted to fly F4s, and they had no F4 slots available. So they said, if you will stay for 2 years as an instructor, what we called a plowback back then you can get what you want. And so I did that for 2 years, which was a terrific experience. Got a whole bunch of flying experience in the A4, which benefited me a great deal in the Blue Angels, and then got to the F-4 Phantom, which I flew in out of Oceana. At the time, I was, I'd seen the Blue Angels fly, and it was always awe-inspiring. I saw them in Kingsville and in Phantoms, and Kevin O'Mara, who was on the team at that time, and KO came and spoke to our squadron, and he stood up in front of the ready room, and here was this guy that looked like he was 7 feet tall. Everything about him was just awe-inspiring. And then I thought, this is something that would be really cool, but it's way outside my possibilities. I wound up going to the Bureau of Naval Personnel as a detailer for about a year, and I put in an application for the Blues, and I didn't really think there was much chance of me getting it. Most guys that are applying for the Blue Angels have a squadron that they're coming from, and they have an airplane they can fly to get to where the places. But I didn't. I was in Washington, D.C. at the time, so I had to get an airplane ticket to go to some place to see the Blue Angels, and it was expensive for a young naval officer, and so I looked at their schedule, and they had an air show in Billings, Montana, and I figured, well, no applicant is going to go there except me, because they can't fly in there in a military airplane. So I bought a ticket to Billings, and I was waiting on the ramp when the Blue Angels show up, and you're just so struck dumb with awe when they show up in their shiny blue jets and they climb out. And they said, well, we have this social commitment tonight at this restaurant, and you're welcome to come, coat and tie. It's embarrassing to even think about now, but they bring a dinner to us, and it was steak, and I picked up the A1 sauce and went to shake it, and the lid flew off the A1 sauce, and the A1 sauce flew all over the commanding officer and flight leader of the Blue Angels, Casey Jones, all over his light-colored suit. And I had no idea what to do, and I picked up my napkin and reached over and started dabbing Casey Jones's suit with this napkin. And if I could have gone right through the earth to China at that point, I would have been happy to do it. It was so embarrassing. Well, then, you know, several months go by, and I went to a couple other air show sites, and when I finally got selected by the team, they kind of spoofed me and said, you know, one of the reasons that we selected you is because you're the only guy that dumped A1 sauce on the commanding officer and flight leader of the Blue Angels. So when I came to the team, they told me I was going to be the narrator in the first year. And in Blue Angels, you're generally a 2-year tour, but if you narrate the first year, you get to fly 2 years in the demo. So when I was the narrator, my crew chief was a guy named Jerry White, who was a wonderful man, and he was aware of everything that went on in my life. And he would go with me to set up the show sites, and when we'd go one day early, and he was take care of the jets, take care of me, and make sure things were done well. The first flight I flew, we wore gloves because that was a requirement, and I rolled them down 2 inches, so I looked like Rowdy Yates on Rawhide. You know, I thought I was cool. And when I pulled them off, I just threw them down on the console and climbed out of the airplane. And for the next 3 years, every time I climbed into a blue jet, my gloves were sitting down on the right-hand console, rolled down 2.5 inches. And that's the kind of stuff that you get into an airplane that, as far as you know, had never been tested by you. And you trusted it completely that you would do anything with it the instant you took off, and not worry in the slightest bit. And the reason is because of the maintenance guys that we had. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Your United States Navy Flight Demonstration Squadron takes pleasure in performing for you this our 35th flight demonstration of the 1977 season.
This is Lieutenant Bruce Davey, narrator for the Blue Angels. Since 1946, the Blue Angels have had the rare privilege to demonstrate the precision techniques of naval aviation to the American public.
Our narration back then was intended to get the people in the crowd involved in the air show, and to feel pride in the fact that it was their team, we were part of their organization, and they should be proud of the fact that we were there for them.
Last year's narrator from Idaho, Lieutenant Commander Bruce Davey.
After being the narrator for a year, I was a left wingman, and at that time, Boss Jones, Casey Jones, had left. And the new boss, Bill Newman, was the commanding officer. Certainly flying was more fun than narrating, and you certainly sweated more too. And it was fun because Don Simmons, who was a slot pilot, was a good teacher. He was a solid citizen and a solid teacher, but he didn't want you to screw it up, and he would stay on top of you. Your mind is going really fast, and what Don Simmons would say is, if you have another thought cross your mind while you're in the demonstration other than what you're doing at that moment, in other words, if you think about the sky is blue or the smoke is white, if any of those thoughts cross your mind, you're not concentrating the way you need to. And in fact, he would say sometimes in winter training, you're not concentrating. And I would think to myself, dadgummit, I'm concentrating as hard as a person can concentrate. And I realized that there was a whole nother level of concentration where this was a focus that was beyond anything I'd ever done before. It was an absolute, total focus and concentration on completing the maneuver and being in position during the maneuver. And I think that leveling, that bringing me up to a level that I'd never experienced. People say that, well, Squire just wanted to be a solo pilot. He wanted to be able to fly upside down, and that's what the boss always accuses me of. But we were setting up for the 79 year when I was going to be the slot pilot, and Mike Nord was going to be number 3, and Fred Stankovich was going to be number 2. The Farvel was up to this time had always been flown with the leader upside down and the rest of the diamond 2, 3, and 4 right side up. And I asked the boss if we couldn't try the double Farvel, which was the boss upside down and the slot pilot upside down, and 2 and 3 right side up. And he said, go ahead and try it out. Go out into the desert, and you and Nordo, Mike Nord, see whether you can fly it that way, if you are inverted and you drop down into my exhaust or get caught in my wingtip vortices, if you can recover from it and not hit me or hit the ground. And we discovered that we could handle it pretty well, and so the boss said, well, let's give it a try. The interesting thing about it, though, is that when you're flying in inverted formation, where you are in negative G flight, if you want to go right, you have to move the stick to the left. And if you want to go left, you have to move the stick to the right. And if you want to go up, you have to push forward. So all the flight controls are reversed, which when you're inverted, that negative G flying, that's true regardless. But formation flying is a little bit more complex than that. I had everything I ever wanted in the Blue Angels. I was flying shiny jets in front of people that thought I was cool. And I discovered from that didn't fill my cup, that there was something else, that there was a deep hole that I believe is wired inside every person. And that's where I turned my life over to the Lord, became a strong Christian, and believed that through the redemptive power of Jesus Christ that we are saved, and that we'll spend eternity with Him in heaven. And quite honestly, it changed a lot of things, and even in the way I flew. And the guys would kind of give me a hard time about it. I'd say that, you know, I just turned that line of breast loop over to the Lord, and that's why I'm in position. It was easy. I wasn't nearly as tight. And they'd kid me about it and say, who flew the line abreast loop today, Squire? And I'd say, well, the Lord did, but I did even better, boss. I prayed that He'd fly your jet. Because if the boss doesn't do well, then nobody does well. And I'm thankful that it was the insertion in my life that is certainly the key to my existence now.